Thank you for that. Thank you for that. So, today you're going to get a little bit of Professor Pelley rather than Minister Pelley. I don't do this very often, but things are happening that I think you need to know about, and you need to know about why they're happening. So I just invite you to sit back. This will be a bit of a lecture that you'll see at the end why we're doing it. So my first question, as your professor, does anybody here remember the most important thing that happened in 325? The year 325. Didn't do the reading, did you? I knew. Whoa, gold star. Perfect. Perfect, yes. So, 325, it's the 4th century, still pretty early in Christian history, in the Christian church. Yes, 325 years after the death of Christ, but it's still pretty early. But they're far enough along that the Christians had a really strong foothold in the empires around the Mediterranean. It had helped that Constantine, Emperor Constantine, had converted, not really, to Christianity in his own way, and had stopped the state persecution of Christians. So it really helps to grow a church if they stop killing you. We all agree on that? Good. Okay. But yet now there were still problems, because for the first 300 years or so of this idea of Christianity, it had grown and developed beyond that little cult of followers of the man from Nazareth. And given the messiness that we probably all have felt of religious development, many disagreements, shocking, right? Many disagreements had broken out as to the nature, the purpose, the rules of what it was to be a Christian. Constantine, who was much more a politician and warrior than a theologian. By the way, Constantine didn't actually get baptized till 10 years after 325, so in 335. So and the ostensible reason is he wanted to put it off so that his baptism would wash away that much more sin. He's a planner. But Constantine was much more of a politician and needed to sort of consolidate all these quarrelsome versions of Christian practice and thought that were promulgated through the 200 or so bishops across his realm. They would fight with each other constantly. So what he did is he brought them all to his lakeside retreat in Nicaea, and that's in Turkey, what is now Turkey, and had them, come down for the weekend, and we're going to hash out all these differences. Now, the main argument was this really kind of fine point of theology, but it was an important one for the Christians, and it was on the nature of Jesus. And the question was Jesus wholly, what was Jesus? Was Jesus wholly divine, a manifestation of God's self? Or was Jesus wholly human, divinely inspired, but wholly human? Now, I'm going to simplify here. I had to take about 500 words out of the sermon, so I'm simplifying. But that was the basic gist. And the decision mattered for them, because for some, worshiping both Jesus and God as divine beings kind of messes up that whole monotheism idea, right? You have two things, and you can't. So that was problematic. And that was, by the way, the viewpoint of there was a prelate from Egypt named Arius, and this was his opinion. He says we can't have two divine beings that we worship. Now, for others, salvation or union with God could not possibly be achieved if Jesus was just a man, just another guy, another preacher. We're not going to get saved if it's just one of them, right? And that was, there was a bishop from Alexandria named Athanasius, and that was his position. So the big fight was between what were known as the Arians, not the bad kind, A-R-I-A-N-S, and the Athanasians. And so they got together, and they argued for days, and then they voted. This is my favorite part. They voted. And the side that believed that God and Jesus were both wholly divine, of the same substance, as they would say, they won the debate. Arius, who, by the way, is sort of a pre-Unitarian, I always consider him a Unitarian, but it's hard to apply that to somebody who didn't use the term. Arius lost the debate. And this has been the basis of Christian doctrine ever since. And I will note a couple other interesting tidbits that came from from Nicaea. One was the Nicene Creed, that some of you were raised in Christian churches probably learned to recite. It's the one that starts, "We believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of all things visible and invisible, and in one Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, begotten from the Father, only begotten, that is, from the substance of the Father, God from God, light from light, true God from true God." It goes on. But I want to point out the little coda at the end because it's important. So they get through the most part of this, and then they get to this part, which is, "But as for those who say there was when he was not, and being born he was not, and that he came into existence out of nothing, or who assert that the Son of God is a different hypostasis," they're just really good with the words here, "or substance, or created, or is subject to alteration or change," in other words, that Jesus was a man, "these Catholic and Apostolic Church anathematizes." In other words, what they just did is told Arius and all Arius' friends, they're a bunch of Unitarians and they're heretics. You don't want to be a heretic in this time. Now, the Nicene, if that wording sounds odd to you, for those of you who grew up in a church that recited the Nicene Creed, they did rewrite it about 30 years later, simplified it a little bit, made the language make a little more sense. But basically, that has stayed as a clear piece of Christian doctrine ever since. And I invite us today to ponder for a moment what we have learned, what we human beings have learned about everything in the subsequent 1,697 years. There's a doctrine that was created in 325 that is solid, unchanging, unchangeable. But yet we, as humans, have maybe learned a few things since then, I assert. And on the one hand, I kind of get the comfort and stability that such an idea can have, that sort of doctrinal solidity, the certainty, the trust, the steadfastness that quells the anxiety we often feel about the next moment in this life. We just don't know what's going to happen. And so I get it. I do. That desire for stability, and if you can find it in your doctrine, in your church, in your religious belief, that's a great place, right? Solid as a rock. The problem is, for me, that in my experience of this world, my study of its history, my understanding of the nature of the universe, teaches me that stability is an illusion. Change is the most real thing I know. And resistance to change is perhaps both inevitable, because we like stability, right? I was thinking about this. Stability is really nice, because I'm thinking about, when I drive home today, I know my house is going to be there. That's pretty stable. Now, 1,000 years from now, it's going to be gone. So that's that. But that resistance to change is what causes, I believe, most of our suffering. Participating in change is the most life-giving, spiritually and intellectually engaging thing that I know of. And I have to confess, it can be very exhausting. Constant change is just exhausting. But it is this engagement with a changing universe, a changing humanity, that quite frankly attracted me to and holds me to Unitarian Universalism. So today I want to talk about a change that is happening right now in the larger Unitarian Universalist project. So another bit of history. Like I said, this is pretty didactic. We'll get there. As most of you know, or many of you know, the Unitarian Universalism that we know of today is actually the product of a merger of two parallel religious traditions, the Unitarians and the Universalists. And the merger happened in, quiz time, 1961. But you're going to see. The merger happened in 1961. Although I like to point out that these two, the American Unitarians and the Universalists, both had sort of national youth groups that merged in 1956. The kids will always beat us. They can clear out all the silliness faster and say, no, we're the same. So anyway. Now, Unitarians and Universalists, the two groups, were aligned on much of their theology and their polity. That's a great word I love. And their polity is simply how they organized and governed themselves. And they both had a strong sense that if they were truly to be an inclusive, beloved community, that a creedal test, like a Nicene Creed kind of thing, a creedal test could never be part of our system. But of course, there were differences between the Unitarians and the Universalists, and the differences mattered. So in 1961, they sat down to figure out what the combined organization would be, how it would be governed, etc. In other words, they got together to hammer out the details in the bylaws. Unitarian Universalists do not have a sacred scripture, but we've got bylaws. And Article 2 of those bylaws establishes the purposes of the association, why we're doing this at all. Polity nerd note. Unitarians and Universalists have almost always operated under what we call congregational polity. That is, the local congregation, like Mill Creek, governs itself. It is not governed from a higher authority. You are the authority. So the UUA, as we call it, the Unitarian Universalist Association, is just that. It is an association of self-governing congregations. And by nature of an association, every congregation is burdened with the responsibility for and to every other congregation. Back to 1961. How do we do this? How do we establish a common set of ideas, of purpose, of principle, that a diverse set of religious folks could find themselves within, while avoid establishing an exclusionary creed that shuts out all other forms of belief and understanding? Go. Right? So what emerged from those discussions, and let me be honest, they weren't discussions, they were knockout, drag-out, screaming fights, lasting well into 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, over days and nights. But what emerged from those were the 6 principles. There were 6, and they were not these. They read as follows, in accordance, this is what it said in 1961. In accordance with these corporate purposes, the members of the UUA, dedicated to the principles of a free faith, unite in seeking one, to strengthen one another in a free and disciplined search for truth as the foundation of our religious fellowship. So you can hear that, right? Okay. Number 2, to cherish and spread the universal truths taught by the great prophets and teachers of humanity in every age and tradition, immemorially summarized in the Judeo-Christian heritage as love to God and love to man. Number 3, to affirm, defend, and promote the supreme worth of every human personality, the dignity of man, and the use of the democratic method in human relationships. Again, you might hear some of those echoes. Number 4, to implement our vision of one world by striving for a world community founded on ideals of brotherhood, justice, and peace. Brotherhood, justice, and peace. Number 5, to serve the needs of member churches and fellowships, to organize new churches and fellowships, and to extend and strengthen liberal religion. And number 6, to encourage cooperation with men of goodwill in every land. You'll notice I sort of emphasize the gendered language because that's important. Now, you probably, of course, recognize the essences of these statements in the 7 principles that you are more familiar with. And you probably also recognize some of the language problems. And of course, in 1961, the gendered language was de rigueur. It was how things were written. But it was also the beginning of the 60s and the 70s, right? And as movements of liberatory feminism came to the fore, it became evident that we might want to update the language a bit. There were groups of Unitarian Universalist women who referred to themselves as the manhunters, who would seek out every reference to gendered language in our documents and change it. Like, we are men, we are humans. Let's include everybody, right? So the first part, and so from 1961 to the first part of like late 1970s, Eugene Pickett was the president of the UUA, and he saw this move coming, and so he helped develop a process to alter the 6 principles, to review them, revise them. And so there was a process in the early 1980s, and in 1985, a final vote, this is a part I dropped, there's a lot of interesting history here, but the final vote on the now familiar 7 principles was made, and they added then the 5 sources. I know you say there's 6, but that wasn't there. So at the 1985 General Assembly, they voted on this whole new set of 7 principles and 5 sources, and it passed with a single dissenting vote. General Assembly, usually there's around 2,000 delegates. I'm not sure what it was in 1985, but it's significant. So having only 1 vote, that's both very Unitarian Universalist. There's always going to be the 1 dissenting vote. And it's also unusually unanimous, not quite unanimous. The next substantive change to the principles and the 5 sources were the adding of the 6th source, which was to acknowledge earth-based religion as one of our sources of inspiration. Now, perhaps if you are a governance geek, and I use that term lovingly because I am, you will have read the Unitarian Universalist bylaws, past Article 2, which is our principles and purposes. Anyone? Yeah, I didn't think so. Because some 20 pages later, we come to Article 15, where we do what might be the most amazing thing. Article 15 mandates that Article 2, our principles and purposes, the principles and purposes of this religious movement and this association, must be reviewed at least every 15 years. This wasn't, we've decided this is it forever and ever and ever for the next 1,600 years. right? We said, no, every 15 years, we got to think about this. Look at it again. Now, I note all of this history for a couple of reasons. First, that this is, and I assert always has been, a religious tradition that does not proclaim an eternal, unchanging truth. It is a tradition that values the ever-evolving, ever-learning, ever-growing notion of the wholeness of our humanity. Changes to the language of our principles and purposes is a natural outgrowth of our spiritual, emotional, and intellectual evolution. And second, guess what? We're at that 15-year mark again. The last review of Article 2 began in 2006. They were a little late, but they got it going. And there were some recommended revisions, some rewording, some changes that were brought to the General Assembly for final vote in 2009, and I don't have time to get into what all of that was, but it was wholesale rejected. I mean, there were issues with that, both for the people who wanted the changes and the people that didn't want any changes, because they only had one choice. It was an up or down vote on everything. So, that. And I'll offer you one more data point before I unbury the lead of this entire thing. Several years ago, there developed a movement in our congregations to create an eighth principle. Anyone aware of the eighth principle project? One or two? Okay. Yeah. I will say that many of our congregations, I don't know the exact number, but I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't approach half, have voted to adopt the eighth principle. Mill Creek has not. That's largely, oh no, it's not largely, it's entirely my fault. I didn't tell you about it. I didn't introduce it to you. I didn't give you the space to ponder it or vote on it. I take that. We can talk about that later. The eighth principle reads as follows. We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote, journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions. Do you notice a difference in the language? Affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity. Accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and institutions. There's a switch in action and language. That's not why I didn't bring it to you. Again, we can talk about that later. Now, because of the eighth principle and this sort of radical shift in language, and because of the failed revisions of 2009, and because of Article 15, and because we are an ever-evolving, ever-learning, ever-growing religious movement, a commission to review and revise Article 2 was formed at the 2020 General Assembly, which happened in June of 2020. And for those of you who didn't know that happened, you are forgiven. Because you might remember June of 2020, some other things were on your mind, and you probably weren't very carefully on Zoom following the debate at the General Assembly. I wasn't either. That commission has produced a draft of a new Article 2 that is now in circulation. I have printed copies of it on the back table. There's about 20 of them. If you want more, I can get you more. Right? I want to highlight the substantive changes that are being proposed. First, it's the title of the section. Currently, Article 2 is titled Principles and Purposes. The revised version proposes it read Purposes and Covenant. making explicit the covenantal relationship of our congregations and our people. And it removes principles, all 7 of them. Article 2, Purposes and Covenant. Section C-2, C-2.1. I love our religious document being bylaws. Anyway. First section reads, Purposes. The Unitarian Universalist Association shall devote its resources to and exercise its organizational powers for religious, educational, and humanitarian purposes. Its primary purposes are to equip congregations for vital ministry, to support and train leaders, both lay and professional, to heal historic iniquities, and to advance our Unitarian Universalist values in the world. We will transform the world by our liberating love. Not bad. Section C-2.2, Values and Covenant. And this is the book. This is the change. It begins. Love is the enduring force that holds us together. As Unitarian Universalists in religious community, we covenant, congregation to congregation, and through our association to support and assist each other in engaging our ministries. We draw from the heritages of freedom and reason, hope and courage, building on the foundation of love. Love inspires and powers the passion with which we embody our values, inseparable from one another. And these shared values are, if you look at your order of service, the image on the cover has love in the middle and then these words around the side, and you'll be able to see the connection here. These shared values are justice. We work to be diverse, multicultural, beloved communities where all people thrive. We covenant to dismantle racism and all forms of oppression within individuals and our institutions. We are accountable to each other for this work. Generosity. We cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope. We covenant to freely share our faith, presence, and resources. Compassionate generosity connects us one to another in relationships of mutuality. Evolution. We adapt to a changing world. We covenant to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically. Evolution is fundamental to life and to our Unitarian Universalist heritages, never complete and never perfect. Pluralism. We celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, theology, and experience. We covenant to learn from one another and to openly explore the depth and breadth of our many wisdoms. We embrace our differences and our commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect. Equity. We declare that every person has the right to flourish with dignity and worthiness. We covenant to use our time, our wisdom, our attention, and money to build and sustain a fully inclusive and accessible community of communities. Interdependence. We honor the sacred interdependent web of all existence with humility. We understand our place in the web. We covenant to care for and respect the earth and all beings by fostering relationships of mutuality. We work to repair the bonds we have broken. There are 3 more sections. I'll let you read them on your own. It has to do with our inspirations, our inclusion, and our freedom of belief. Now, friends, I am well aware that I am abusing your attention right now. Maybe this matters to you. Maybe it doesn't. This being this change to our Unitarian Universalist purpose and principles. So I'm going to try and quickly conclude, and I'm going to give you two things here. First, the process piece. I know many of you, maybe most of you, are hearing this for the first time. And you're like, wait, hold on. I might have something to say about this, right? And then secondly, why I, as your minister, support this wholesale revision. So the process. With this draft, again, it's in the back, and the other thing I invite you to do is to go on uua.org, the website, and search for Article 2, probably just do that, Article 2 Commission, and it'll bring you to a page, and there's a lot of great information on there. But with this draft, there are going to be some listening sessions over the next couple of weeks. They actually started this weekend, so we're a few days into it. They're on Zoom. If you go to that website on uua.org, look for this study commission, the Article 2 Commission. There are times where you can sign up and not only hear, but have your voice heard. So that'll happen now. Any revisions to this draft will happen by the end of the month. Another draft will go out. We'll do the same thing in December. There'll be a couple of weeks of these Zoom sessions so you can have your voice heard. Okay. Then the final draft will go to the Board of Trustees of the UUA in January, who will presumably place it on the agenda for the General Assembly next June 2023. We're nothing if we're not good process people. June 2023, which is in Pittsburgh, so you all can go. We'll get more information about that coming to you soon. But it'll be in Pittsburgh. There'll be lots of listening sessions. I'm guessing it will probably dominate the conversation at General Assembly. And then there will be a vote. And if there is a majority vote for this change, guess what? It all goes back to the congregations for another year. And we'll hash it out, and we'll talk about it, and we'll learn about it, and we'll learn about each other. And then, in June of 2024, there will be another vote at General Assembly. A 2/3 vote will enshrine this in our bylaws for at least 15 years. Right? And these will go away. Now, honestly, we can keep them up. We don't have, nothing actually changes. I still think these are true. So that's true, and we can change. So I do invite you to become as involved as you wish, as you are so moved. We have time. There's a little urgency right now, because this draft is moving forward. But there's time to have your voice heard. If it matters to you, if you want to hear and listen to each other, if you want to speak into it, I do encourage you to do so. And not just to me. I have no authority in this thing. On to my last piece here. I have to confess that when I first found Unitarian Universalism, it wasn't lost. I was. But let's put it that way. When Unitarian Universalism found me, the 7 principles were such a profoundly refreshing light in my life, coming from a creedal tradition whose creeds I could no longer hold. I found the 7 principles to be solid ground from which to grow an authentic soul. But over time, my friends, they've kind of become stale for me. And I've been thinking about this ever since I heard about the revision. There's nothing wrong with them. I still agree. I still affirm and promote. But they just don't go quite far enough for me. They don't call me into action. They don't call me to do anything more than affirm and promote. It's kind of like it's just calling me to sit in the stands at a Phillies game or an Eagles game, right? I'm affirming and promoting. Go team. Affirming and promoting does not call me to play. Affirming and promoting doesn't really even call me to risk anything. I can just give the little like symbol, right? Affirm and promote. It's invigorating, but what have I done? Now, friends, I'm only about 5 days ahead of you. I got this draft on Tuesday. So I'm still absorbing it and discerning its meaning for me, for our association, for our congregations. But here's where I'm most exciting. First of all, love is at the center. Love is not implied. It's sort of interesting when you read this draft and go back to this version. Love isn't even mentioned. We put love at the center. Love not implied, love not assumed, but love explicitly at the center of who we are and what we are doing. And of course, I'm going to support that. And second, this document engages us in active language. No sideline sitting here. We are being called into the world to work, to dismantle, to share, to cultivate, to grow, to celebrate, to learn, to explore, to embrace, to declare, to build, to honor, to care, to transform. In the words of our Mill Creek mission, we are being called to awaken to love. And so, friends, I encourage you to engage in this conversation amongst each other, amongst the larger Unitarian Universalist community, this conversation about who we are as Unitarian Universalists today, not who we were in 1985 or not who we were in 1961, and certainly not who we were in 325, when we weren't, except heretics. Right. Yay, heretics. Unitarian Universalism's greatest strength is that it is a this world theology, a faith for this moment. Our fathers and mothers and grandmothers and grandfathers, all our ancestors, needed a different kind of faith for their moment, a different language for their moment, a different ground from which to engage the world. They left us this legacy of change, and now it is ours to shape for ourselves, for this moment, and for this time. Amen, my friends. And I do love you. And may we live in blessing.